Hi guys, it's Lena here, and let's talk top 10 of 2024. I'm a little bit late, but that's okay. It's still January, so I think it still counts. I have compiled my list of my top 10 books read in 2024. I read 137 books throughout the year, both physically and audiobook wise. And I have physical books for most of these, but a couple of them were audiobooks that I got from the library, so I might not have those covers with me. But I'm just going to get started. I'm gonna try and keep it short and sweet because really this is just a list, right? So yeah, but my number 10 book that I read this year, this was an audiobook that I got from the library, and it was Tom Lake by Anne Patchett. I'm so wholesome, aren't I? I have an Anne Patchett book on my list. A novel about family, love, and growing up through the story of Laura, who is a woman who recounts her past years in summer stock theater while in COVID lockdown with her 3 daughters. And the story took place in northern Michigan on this family's cherry farm. And if you don't know, I am from Michigan, so there were parts of this that really just felt very at home to me. Like not only the setting, but also because our main character was involved in theater. I'm also an actor, so there were just like a lot of pieces that just felt so comforting to me, and I read the book because my mom recommended it to me. The story just felt so full and so complete, and I just really enjoyed my time with it. My number 9 book of the year was Tales from the Cafe, which is the second book in the, what is this series called? I don't know if it's Before the Coffee Gets Cold, if that's the actual name of the series or if it has a different name. But yes, Tales from the Cafe by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. So this is a heartwarming story set in a small Tokyo cafe rumored to offer the ability to travel back in time, where customers come to revisit significant moments with loved ones, confronting the past and finding closure. Each chapter follows a different character, and even though you're with them for a very short time, you develop such a deep affection for them through that time on the page. And there is, I believe, 4 characters total in this one. Themes of regret, forgiveness, and just the immense power of human connection. So I thought this one was so beautiful. I loved the first one as well, and I've kind of been like just allowing myself to read one per year. Otherwise I would sit down and I would read them all like back to back. But they're just like such a sweet comfort, and I read it during like spring break, so I just had time to just like sit with it and enjoy it. So yeah. Definitely, if you have not jumped into this world yet, I highly recommend. So my number 8 book is another one that I got from the library, and also one that I want to purchase a physical copy of at some point, and that is The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst. But this was a cozy fantasy novel, and our main character is a librarian. She's very passionate about protecting these texts. She takes her job very seriously, and there is some kind of I'm not sure if it's a war or a fire, but there's something that is happening that puts the archives at risk. And so she, although against the rules to bring like these tomes out of the library, she steals them away and goes to a small town and kind of goes like undercover so no one finds her with all of her stolen books. And she has a sentient spider plant that is like her familiar. And this spider plant I loved so much. It makes me sad that I haven't been able to keep a spider plant alive. Maybe I will give it another try now that I am inspired by this story. It's just a story of friendship and community and found family, and just how she makes herself at home in this new space, and how her, well, I think it's like her childhood home, like her childhood island that she grew up on. If I remember correctly. And obviously she makes some great friends and meets some really wonderful people along the way. But it was just so cozy and comforting, and it was just really sweet. I really loved it. Yay! This is a big switch, but number 7 on my list is a completely different vibe. That is It by Stephen King. I cannot believe I read this book. This was like what I felt like was like a goal in my lifetime, to read this book before I die. And I did, and I loved it. I was kind of like obsessed with it afterwards. I couldn't stop thinking about it. There's just, I mean, there's so much in here, obviously. I've always loved the film adaptation, the one that came out more recently, parts 1 and 2. I just loved those movies, and so I read this, I think during spring break, or maybe it was the beginning of summer, but I wanted to kind of save it for that time because I knew that that's when it took place. I mean, you probably know the premise of this story, but it's like 7 young friends in the town of Derry, Maine, and there are these mysterious things that happen, and people being hurt, children going missing, and they are trying to solve this mystery, and there is like this wild shape-shifting monster that takes the form of Pennywise, that is haunting these children long into adulthood. But the connections between the characters were so beautiful. The jumping from children to adults was just done so well, and there were times where I felt like even though they were adults in some portions of the story, they still were operating like their child selves because of the trauma that they had experienced. Just an incredible story. If you love horror, I definitely recommend this. Yes, it's an undertaking, but it's totally worth it. So many trigger warnings though, so definitely if you've got any hesitation, look into those, because I'm having a hard time thinking of a trigger warning that isn't in here. So yeah, proceed with caution, but fantastic. Next book, number 6, is Allwell by Mona Awad. I loved this. I was working on a production of Macbeth this past year, and in this story we are following a woman who has a chronic illness, who she is just in terrible pain all of the time, and she is a former actress and now theater professor, and she's putting on All's Well That Ends Well, but the group of college students that she's directing are not happy about that decision, and they want to be doing Macbeth, so they're like trying to like overthrow it. And she meets these like 3 mysterious men in a bar and kind of like strikes up a deal with them, and then she develops the ability to transfer her pain to others. And so she's like going through this whole transformation of like recovering and becoming beautiful and desirable and things again. And all of the people around her are like deteriorating, and it is, I mean, the concept of it is really scary. I loved this. And obviously I love Shakespeare, so it's kind of a given, but still, yes, Mona Awad does it again. So great. My next book, number 5, was a bit of a surprise. It was one of my book of the month books, but it was Margot's Got Money Troubles, and I did not have very high expectations for this going in. I hadn't really heard any hype around it before it came out, but the premise just kind of caught me, and I loved it. It was so good. So this follows Margot, who is a young woman who becomes pregnant by her college professor. Gross. And because she's having an affair with him, but he is married, not interested in leaving his wife. And so she is pregnant with his child, and now she is figuring out how to navigate motherhood alone, because she's really young. I think maybe she's like 21. She's very young. And so caring for and loving this child, and she goes through this transformation with her father, who was really like absent through her childhood because he was like a pro wrestler who struggles with addiction. So there were lots of layers there, and she goes through the process of kind of like mending things with him in a way, because he ends up moving in with her. And while all this is going on, she needs to make a living so that she can support herself and her new child. And so she starts an OnlyFans. And then it's like the whole adventure of her having this OnlyFans, which I found very entertaining. There were some parts that were like a little weird, obviously, but I just loved exploring like what it means to be a human in the world and be monetizing your existence in the world. Because like, I don't know, when you think about it, OnlyFans, like these are consenting adults with these accounts. How does that differ from someone who makes a living by being an influencer and sharing their life online? I don't know. There's just like, there's a lot to explore there. It's really interesting. And I just really like this idea of like, okay, so who says what's right and what's wrong, especially in comparison to her and like the professor who is the father of her child. Just so unexpectedly enjoyable. So number 4. Is this my number 4? Yes, it's my number 4. So What the River Knows is my number 4. I have not read the sequel to this yet, but I should really just order it and do that because I don't want to forget too much of this before I read that. So this is a historical fantasy about Inez, and she is a young woman whose parents go mysteriously missing, and they have been in Egypt searching for Cleopatra's tomb. And there are just like these really beautiful elements of magical realism woven throughout the story. And she goes to Egypt to figure out what happened to her missing parents. And in that process, meets a very interesting man who she doesn't get along with right away. So there's like a little bit of enemies to lovers happening here, which I love. And I feel like you don't see very many stories set in Egypt. So I just found this setting really, really fun and fresh as far as like a fantasy novel goes and as far as historical fiction goes. Because then she also goes onto this exploration of finding Cleopatra's tomb, and it's kind of like a race against time because she has to find it before there's another party involved that's trying to find it, and she discovers magic while she's doing that, and it's just very exciting. I really loved it. I read it, and then I listened to the audiobook when I was in the hospital recovering from my C-section. So I read it twice because I really enjoyed it, and when it ended, I wasn't ready for it to end, so My number 3 book for the year is My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. I don't know what took me so long to read this. I feel like I was hesitant, and I have no idea why, because this is incredible. And if you have not read this series yet, pick it up. It's so good. The sequel is also, I mean, I could have had them both here, but this was the one that made me fall in love with it, so this is the one that I have here. But it follows Jade Daniels. She's a Native American teenager living in kind of like a tough situation because she has an abusive father and an absent mother, and the city that they're in is going through this whole like process of like gentrification. And so you're seeing like these different people coming into town, and she has an obsession with slashers, and she is basically watching all of these little events happening and is assessing how these could be events happening in a slasher film, and maybe this actually is a slasher that she's in right now, and not like, is this reality, but just like, is this the course of what's about to happen in my life? And she's wondering if she's a final girl, if someone else is the final girl, and she's just constantly like comparing things that are happening to different slasher films, and it's so enjoyable, especially if you do enjoy a slasher, because all of the little Easter eggs throughout and things you will see and you will love, and it will make you so happy. So I mean, as happy as like a dark horror can, I suppose, but this really has kind of solidified that Stephen Graham Jones is for sure one of my favorite authors. I can't think of anything of his that I've read that I haven't thoroughly enjoyed. So his writing is just so, it's like addictive. I love it. My last two books, let's see here. So number 2 is a little bit of a cheat because I started it in 2024 and I finished it in 2025. So I don't know which year it counts for, but it is Little Women. I don't know why I waited so long in my life to read this book. This book is so beautiful, so incredible. Obviously the film adaptations are wonderful in their own like respective ways, but the book still has so much more beautiful story to tell, and I just loved these 4 sisters so much. I have a heart for this because I grew up watching the Winona Ryder film version with my mom. We would watch it like every year around Christmas time. And a few years ago, before Topher and I were married, we were in a production of Little Women, and I played Jo and he played Laurie, and we kind of like fell in love with each other throughout the process of being those characters. And so this has a very special place in my heart already. But oh my gosh, it did not disappoint. I had such high expectations and it was so beautiful. So if you have not read this, make the time to do so because it is so beautiful. So beautiful. And then my number 1 book of the year, which possibly is also a cheat. I'm not sure, but I'm saying that it's not because it is The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. These were originally intended to be 1 book, so I feel like it counts as one, my number 1, Lord of the Rings. Kind of an anticlimactic number 1 because obviously like this is an incredible world that everyone who's ever read it is like, oh my god, this is amazing. I want to be in this world like all the time. I want to live in the Shire, you know? And that was very much the energy that I had going into this because I had read The Hobbit before, which I loved. Chapter 1 of The Hobbit. If I could just live in that chapter, just being like in my little Hobbit hovel with my warm bread and my baked potatoes and my blankets and all of my knitwear and just like being cozy with a crackling fire and writing with my quill. And okay, I'm getting carried away. But if I was living in a magical world, I would be a hobbit. No question about it. I would absolutely be a hobbit. I don't even like wearing shoes and socks, so I'm halfway there. Also, I'm very short, so. So it begins in the Shire, and Frodo is given this task of destroying the one ring that controls all of the other rings. You probably know this story already. And it is his journey in going along that path to make that happen because he's such an unassuming hero for this story. All of the members of the Fellowship were just so... I love them so much. I'm like ready to I'm ready to read it again. I read it this summer, and I'm ready to just dive right back in, because these were just so, I'm so happy that I thrifted these, because like, oh my gosh, they're so good. Samwise Gamgee just has my heart forever and always, I feel like. I read these right after going to see the 3 films, like the extended versions were like re-released in theater this summer. I don't know if that was like everywhere or if that was just my local theater, but my brother was like, you've got to see these. Do you want to? I was like, yes, please. I was super pregnant at the time, because this was in like what, June or July, and I had my baby in August. So I was super pregnant at the time. So I was really nervous about sitting in a movie theater for like 12 hours watching these films over the course of 3 days. But you know, it worked out. It was great. I do kind of struggle sometimes with high fantasy, just like with the world building, like visualizing what it is that I'm reading. I struggle with that. So seeing the films first for me was the best way to go. And it was the extended version, so there was so much to those, and then I was like obsessed with them after seeing them, and I read these immediately afterward, because I was like, I need more, and I got more, and it was so good. It was so great. And also the audiobook version, because I kind of switched between physical reading and audiobook, and doing like both simultaneously. But on Audible, the audiobooks are read by Andy Serkis, who plays Gollum in the films, and perfection. Perfection. It was so good. And so I want to read these again now. I love them so much. And so yeah, so it was a great reading year. Even though I read less books than the 2 previous years, I still had so many great books that I loved, and I really started to kind of fall in love with fantasy. And I am hoping that throughout this year I am able to find more fantasy books that really just speak to me, because it is it's always been something that's like hard for me to delve into. I just have always struggled. So this has awakened something in me, and now I'm ready for adventure. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. I would love to know what your favorite book of the year was last year. And if you want to share your whole top 10, please do in the comments. I would love that. If you haven't, like and subscribe. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.